Yo le introducí en español, pero la idea ahora es que Matías me pidió si podía presentar en inglés, ya más hay gente que no sabe mucho español, así que muy bienvenido, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias por la introducción, Margarita. So well, yes, I excuse myself like for hopefully English is gonna be fine, and of course and it'll be around, stay around like in case that there are questions and such. And well, this is we present this joint work with my amazing collaborator. So Yuri Feinstein, he's one of my advisors at Columbia, and then we have two faculty from Católica here. So Victor Verdugo and Jose Ferchay, who's in the audience there. And I'll be talking about symmetries and discrete optimization. So let's get started. So this is.
You have to find the computer. No?
No.
Un minuto. Right here?
Give me a sec. Yes, now it's running, I guess. Yes. It was me? Yes. That's running. Yes. Perfect. Gracias. So, okay, let's get started. So, I'll be talking about integer programs. So you have a linear objective function here. X is your vector of decision variables. You have linear constraints, and you also have constraints in the variables that they need to be integer, right? Well, the pointer is not working, but I can. Those are X needs to be in Zn, and this kind of problems. But some of you have seen this before, so they are used to model problems with integer and binary decision variables, combinatorial optimization, logistics problems like resource allocation, etc. And integer variables can also model constraints for continuous problems. Like for instance, if you are in finance, if you are solving like a portfolio optimization problem, and then for instance, if you want to limit the constraint, the number of the stocks that you're buying, then you can include like cardinality constraints there. And so, or you can also model like complex logical constraints, like if this happens with this variable, then this other thing happens with this variable. So this framework is very flexible, and overall there's plenty of software dedicated to their solutions. So there's Groovy that probably most of you know. There's COpt, there's Skip that's open source, and this is going to be our setting. So we'll be talking about this kind of problems, and so what happens is that now, well, research is constantly trying to push like the boundaries of how we solve this problems. And in principle, one can ask like, well, what makes actually like an integer problem hard for court solvers? And there's like kind of like obvious or kind of like maybe easy deductions that you can think of. Like for instance, what if you have many dimensions, right? If your vector x is very long, right? So then you have many variables, high dimensions. What if you have many constraints, or what if your coefficients are very nasty? Then your problem is numerically ill-behaved, for instance, right? That could also happen. But there's also like less obvious reasons why it could be hard to solve integer programs. So to motivate this, let me first show you an example of an integer program. And we'll see what is this kind of property that makes this problem hard. So and this problem is called the Steiner triple covering problem. It's a very simple. The setting is very simple. All your coefficients are going to be 0 and 1. So the coefficients of your constraint matrix. And these problems are like parameterized by. So they belong to a class of instances. And then there's a parameter that is your parameter k that basically tells you what's the dimension of your problem. And this is going to be, there's a class of these instances that the number of variables is 3 to the k. So this is k equals to 1. So you have 3 variables, and in this case you only have 1 constraint. So this is a very easy problem, right? Just like you're minimizing the sum of the variables, and then you only need to cover 1 constraint. So you can make just like any of those variables 1, and then you're done. Now, let's go to 3 to the power of 2. So now k is equal to 2. And now I'll show you the other constraints that you have, right? And so and constraints are color-coded. So sorry, the variables are color-coded. So, so these are 3 constraints here. And basically, you can think of this as blocks, right? So the first variable in each block is going to be color red, the second blue, and the third green. And so, those are 3 constraints. Now, so basically, you need to cover the first inequality, you need to pick 1 variable from the first set of blocks. Clearly, if your problem is like this, if you permute the variables here, then it seems like you get if you have a feasible solution that you're covering this constraint, and now you permute these variables, you get another feasible solution. And then you can do the same with the other blocks independently. But now this problem is a bit more sophisticated, so we have other type of constraints. And here we're basically saying, oh, from each one of these 3 blocks of 3 variables, then you need to cover the first column. Okay, and so red, blue, and green. But the symmetries that this idea of permuting the variables is still it's still going to be valid for that. But now we are going to add even more constraints. So in total, this instance with 9 variables, you have in total 12 rows. And what you're doing here is basically you're saying how you generate this. You take the first row here, the first column, and now you need to pick a variable that's from a different color and in each of these blocks. And so here we're picking the first variable. Here in the second block, we cannot pick x4. X4, that's red. So you pick something different. So here you're picking blue, right? And then you pick green from the last one. So you cannot pick green, green, right? Or blue, blue. So here you pick again the first variable called red. Here you pick green, right? And so then we cannot pick green on the other side. So then we pick. And then you do that for x1, x2, and x3, and then those are all your constraints. And in a way, as I said before, like if you have a solution and then you move things around, if you have a feasible solution and you move things around, it seems like you might get like some other feasible solution by moving things cleverly in a way. And you can do the same. So so this is 3 to the k as 3 to the power of 2. Now, if you go 3 to the power of 3, then this is going to be like you're going to be your instance is going to be taking like structural similarities with this matrix, and you'll also have this kind of like symmetrical behavior in a way in the constraints. And what happens is that this instance already with 243 variables, that's not super big. It's the biggest instance that has been solved with a solver, and not only with a that has been solved in our community, in the integer programming community. If you go to bigger, so this is 3 to the power of 5. If you go to 3 to the 6, there's no solution for that using these techniques that we will be discussing today. And the instance by itself is not super big. It's not that many variables. Like nowadays, you can solve like problems with like thousands of integer variables with some of the current techniques that we have. So this is a small instance. And what the question is like, why solvers struggle so much for solving this kind of problems? And in this talk, what basically we're gonna uncover is that symmetry is a thing, it's a problem, it's a feature that makes problems hard in this realm. And actually, symmetry is pretty common. Like in at least 40% of problems in standard benchmark libraries for integer programs, they are called the library is called midlib. Exhibit non-trivial symmetries. So if you go to this library where usually there are like easy, hard, and very hard problems, 40%, almost 40 are hard. Have non-trivial symmetries. Now, on the other hand, in the community, it's known, right? It's like for common knowledge that symmetry harms the state-of-the-art techniques for solving this problem. So now, the goal of this talk is to understand why. Well, like a potential reason why that could happen. So plan for the talk is first we're gonna do like a quick overview of the branch and bound method for solving integer programs. So for those of you that probably have taken like integer programming with Gustavo usually teaches that, right? So that's gonna be a bit boring. So I'll go quickly over that, but just I want for everyone to feel to maybe get something out of the talk if you haven't seen it. And then we'll go over the classical perspective on how symmetry can harm the branching part of the algorithm. And that's going to be just like a quick overview. And then the one of our contributions is the third bullet, that's the new perspective on how symmetry can harm the bounding part of this algorithm. And this has been not much studied in the literature. It's been studied like more in a ad hoc approach. Usually they exhibit an instance that's hard to bound in a way, where getting good bounds is hard. But here we aim to provide like a unifying framework, given the features that I'll be discussing in a bit. So how does this work? So maybe for those of you that are back in the audience, it might be hard to read, but this is just like a small optimization problem. So you have a linear objective right above there, and you have only one constraint. So this is like a typical knapsack, how it's called. You have full variables, and they need to be binary, right? So it's either 0 or 1. And now you want to solve this with branch and bound. So what do? So to start with, you relax the integrality constraint. So this method relies on the fact that we only know how to solve linear programs. So you know how to solve linear programs, and then we know that we can divide the feasible region into different subproblems, right? And so we're going to solve these subproblems like recursively, right? And this is basically the whole idea of the method. And I'm going to show you with this example how does that work. So you solve, this is called the root node relaxation. So you relax all the variables, you solve it, and in this case we got an integer solution. So x3 is integer. And whenever you get an integer solution with this method, so you on one of the fractional variables. So in this case, x3 is integer. So fractional. So then we create two subproblems, 1 and 2. So this branch x3 is equal to 0 and x3 is equal to 1. Now, what you do is that you solve now these restricted these subproblems that are restricted, right? So they are restrictions of the original problem. Because now you're going to solve them adding this constraint. So in this subproblem, you have that constraint, but that x3 is equal to 0, and then the other one, x3 is equal to 1. So let's look at the right branch. So now you solve this solution over here, which is fractional as well, because x2 is fractional, right? It's 5/7, and that's, of course, it's not feasible for our integer program. So we branch again. But now we branch on variable x2, right? So we have now two more subproblems. And now something interesting happens, all right? So when you solve this, so here we impose that x3 is equal to 1 and x2 is equal to 0, then when you solve the LP, you get an integer solution. So this is your candidate solution. So this solution might solve your integer program, right? Might be an optimal solution for that. And so we keep it there, right? So, and we don't continue branching here because we already have a candidate. Now, if we look at the other branch, we solve, and again we get a fractional solution. X1 is fractional, and so here what we do is we branch again on x1, and here we have another candidate solution. But in this case, the objective is better than this one. Here we're maximizing. So now we can drop this, and we keep this candidate. This is our new candidate solution. And if we branch here, then by solving well, you can see that if you turn on x3, x2, and x1, then you're not satisfying the linear constraint. So then that's infeasible. So then you can just forget about this part. And so, but then on the other hand, when you solve, you get that bound over there. So at the end, basically we have explored all the region, right? So we finished with the tree. And then this is this basically telling us that this is your optimal solution, right? Okay, so that's like an overview, quick overview of the method. And in order to converge fast, branch and bound method should, ideally, explore a small amount of the tree. You don't want to go super hard. So if you have n variables and then you explore all the way down, then in all of the branches, you'll have like 2 to the n subproblems, and you don't want to do that. That's too expensive. So ideally, you would like to stop like early up in the tree and be able to say, hey, this is your solution. And then the other part is the fact that your bounds, whenever you're solving this, and then basically you're keeping the biggest fractional solution that you're maximizing. So then your bound for the whole method is the highest objective value that's fractional, that it's open. Like it's basically that's for instance in this case the best objective that's fractional. The highest objective is your bound. So this is giving you an overall bound for your integer program. And you would like for this to decrease quickly, the objective bound. So basically you're matching the dual bound, that's what's called. That's the bound that you get from solving the linear program. And then the primal bound, which is the best bound provided by a candidate solution. So ideally, you would like to get good LP bounds at the branch and bound nodes. So now let's go over the classical perspective. Now, how symmetry can harm the branching part. And so let's go back to the problem, the standard triple covering problem. So this is an optimal solution. Like, trust me, you can check that this is, well, you notice that here, if you take one here, you're going to cover this constraint. Then all the constraints, so you're covering this constraint, you're covering this, and this one. Here you're covering the blue, where you have blue, and then here you're covering all the constraints that are in the third part of it. And you can check that it's actually the best that you can do. Look, trust me, the objective for this is going to be 5. But now notice the following: if you take this solution and you start like shifting things around. So this is what I said before, what I mentioned about symmetry here. Now here, what we did is we shifted, and so we take this one and then we put it here. So we do a shift. This one we put it here, and then here we do a shift, but everything is the same. So we have ones in all of those variables. This is also an optimal solution, which is different than this one. So it's equivalent. You get the same objective, and you can do different shifts, and then you get different solutions. And so, and this is the key part for this kind of like perspective regarding the branching, is that as soon as you're going down the tree, then you'll know that there's going to be leaves of your branch and bound tree when you have these candidate solutions. And you know that you can only discard them as soon as you have something that's better, right? Then if you find something that's better than that, you can discard them. But these solutions are going to be way down in the tree in a way. So then you'll have a branch part of the tree where you have a feasible solution, but then by doing things branching in a different way, you get another part of the tree where you get another solution. And the thing is that all of them are equivalent. So then, like if you have something that's clever in the sense that you have an algorithm that takes care of the symmetry of your problem, then you can just say, well, you know what? I'm not going to explore that branch of the tree. I'm just going to focus on this branch, and I'll get one feasible solution, right? One good feasible solution. And then you end up here. And so you don't waste time exploring the other parts of the tree. And that's basically one big portion of the literature. So there are different mechanisms for basically making algorithms symmetry aware. So one way is adding symmetry breaking inequalities. So this is started in our field with Friedman in 2007, a paper, and then there's been a couple of papers on that they mentioned. And Jose, we have a paper on that from 2023. And basically what you do is you add inequalities that are going to chop off feasible solutions, right? Integer solutions. They're not cutting planes in the sense that when you're taking a class with Gustavo, that he says, oh, here's a cutting plane that chops off only fractional solutions. But these inequalities that you have here, they do chop off integer feasible solutions. But you make sure that by adding that inequality, you're at least leaving one feasible solution that's equivalent to that. Right? So you're leaving representatives. So you're chopping like one part, like symmetrical part of your feasible region. And then the other class of methods is like making the branch and bound algorithm symmetry aware. So basically, it helps you with that clever branching. So what I mentioned before of this idea of just exploring one part of the tree and then forgetting about the other part is that corresponds to the techniques that I mentioned here. Okay. And so now let me tell you about the new perspective, like how symmetry can harm the bounding while using this method. So if we go back to the example, we could just stay in the root node and say, well, instead of branching, why don't we add some valid inequalities? So those are the cutting points that I mentioned before. Those are inequalities that they only chop off fractional portions of your feasible region. You're not killing integer solutions. And so the idea is to improve the linear relaxation of the original problem. So you could add this inequality, trust me, is valid. Let's say it's valid. It's actually a class of inequalities that are called cover inequalities for knapsack. But this inequality is not gonna, trust me, it's not gonna chop off integer solutions. So you add that. And by adding this inequality, you get that the bound is 21. The optimum, we saw that's 21. So this is fractional. And so, but then you can add another inequality that you can also show that's valid. And actually, by adding these two inequalities, you get immediately the optimum is 21. And you get an integer solution by doing that. And this is the spirit of the cutting plans. That you are at the root node, and then you add these cuts that do not chop off integer solutions, and then you resolve the LP and see what happens. Like how much did you improve the bound there? And this is the branch and cut method instead of like just branch and bound. So the idea behind this is you wanna, whenever you have the linear relaxation, what you wanna do is that you wanna cut off the fractional, the optimal LP phase, right? So you have your polytope, right? So you have linear constraints there. You solve your linear program, and then there's gonna be a phase of your, from the simplex. We know that we're gonna be at a phase of your feasible region, right? And so now the idea is that you wanna improve. So you want to see whether you improve on that bound. You want to know whether you can if there's no fractional solutions there, whether you can chop off that fractional portion. And so in a way, this what we like are deep cuts. Okay, so for instance, take this integer program. This says this linear inequalities. You only have one there, and then here your objective is going this way, so you're maximizing on that direction. And your integer optimum is going to be this point, right? And so the thing is that you could add this inequality, the red one, and it's chopping off this fractional portion. But what is better is if you actually add the green one. It's dominated clearly, right? And the idea is that eventually you could add this inequality and tells you that this is the new region, the LP optimal LP phase, the new optimal LP phase. And then you probably have to add this other inequality to make sure that you're there. Right? You'll get the same objective value, but you might not get an integer solution. But if you add all of those inequalities, then you get there. That's going to be your integer optimum. So we want deep cuts, and that's basically like something that we can ask for classes of cuts. Is that at least they cut off the optimal LP phase if it's fractional. And so that's the main message of our result, that cutting off the optimal LP phase can be very hard if the problem is very symmetric. That's the main one of the main takeaways of this talk. And that strong cuts perform as bad as weak cuts. So we'll see a class of relaxations that they are different in general. They provide different LP relaxations, but that if our instance is very symmetric, at the end of the day, they are basically the same. They have the same strength. And so for this new perspective, we'll need to define a few things. So first, we'll define what K-transitivity is. That's a property of the symmetries of our feasible region. I'll define that in a minute. And then we'll talk about these linear programming hierarchies. linear programming hierarchies, in a nutshell, are these techniques that tighten up your linear relaxation. They're cutting planes in a way. And then we'll look at the main theorem and some applications, and as well some intuition regarding this. I have some cute pictures regarding that illustrate our results in small dimensions. Okay, so first, key transitivity. What does that mean? So let's start with let's fix a dimension. Let's think that this polytope lives in 5 dimensions, and P is going to denote your linear programming relaxation, right? So it's continuous, right? So we lack the interiority constraint, and we're the root node of our branch and bound tree, and that's P. And now we're going to say that P is one transitive if the following happens. You take any feasible solution for P, and then you take 2 indices. In this case, for instance, in this example, you take 1 and 3. Those are the indices of the variables. And then if you take this feasible solution, and then there exists a permutation of the variables, right, such that this variable is sent to this position, the 3rd position, and whatever, other things happen with the other variables. But what you only need is that you can send a variable in the 1st to the 3rd, and if this point is also feasible, and this happens for every x in your polytope, and for every pair of indices I1 and J1, then you say that the symmetries here you have are one transitive, and that's a key property. Okay. Now, it seems that we can extend this, right? So what if instead of asking only one variable, like only two, one pair of indices, right? And we're sending one variable to any other variable, we can do this like with 2 variables. Now let's pick, for instance, indices 2 and 5. Those are the positions. And now we want to know whether we can send these two folks to, for instance, like this position, the 3rd position, and this guy is sent to this position, the 1st one. Now, if you can do this for every pair of 2 tuples, and you always get some other vector, some other vector x prime in this case. This is a different vector than this. That's also feasible. Then you say that your symmetries are 2 transitive. And in general, you can just say, well, now take k. This k is a natural number, right? That's between 1 and n. And you say that P is going to be 1 transitive if now you can do this business for any pair of k tuples. So it's just like a generalization of what I just did. So then x prime is basically this vector that you have there. That needs to be feasible. So this is an example of one transitive polytope. So this is just the convex hull of these 3 points in 3 dimensions. And right, so these are the 3 red points that we have there. And let's see, well, let's take, for instance, the first index. So we do 1, and then let's take 2. Those are the 2 positions, right? That's going to be our I1 is 1, and then J1 is 2. And so we want to know that if we send this, we take this vector, and now we can send the 1 to the 2nd position, right? There exists a vector that's feasible, a solution that's feasible where you're doing that. And so actually, in this vector, there's we are sending 1 to the 2nd position, and you can basically you can do this exhaustively and notice that you're actually for any pair you can do the same thing. So actually, 1/2 easily you can look at 1/2 is also appears in the 3rd and in the 1st position. 0 appears in the 3rd, the 1st, and the 2nd position, and 1 the same thing. So then basically this polytope is 1 transitive. Yes.
What happens with the other coordinates? It can be any number here. It just randomly occurs that they are really permutations of the 3 coordinates, but I guess that's not the case in general. So you say you can take, for example, the first vertex there.
Yeah.
First coordinate is 1.
Yes.
I can send it in the 2nd position.
Yes.
But in this case, it just happens that the other two values of the quotients are also two values of the second.
Yes, exactly. This is just for the example, but in principle, you only care.
Principle,
Yes,
it can be anything.
exactly. Yes, exactly. That's the business there. Yes, good point. Yes. The thing is that you kind of get like it's hard to get too creative like in 3 dimensions. So yeah. Now, but what if now you do the following? You take now let's see whether this is too transitive or not. If you are too transitive, for being too transitive, you need to pick 2 pairs of indices. So let's pick actually 1 and 2, right? And so what you're gonna do is, so now we can say, I want to send 1 to 2 and 2 to 1, right? So let's see. Let's take this point, and then that needs to hold for every feasible point. So this is feasible. And so if you swap these 2 guys, now you'll have 1/2 and 1. That point is not feasible. So then that tells you that this polytope is only 1 transitive. It's not 2 transitive. And if it's not 2 transitive, you cannot be 3 transitive, etc. But now if you take all of the permutations of this vector, by definition, basically, you can map these guys as whatever as you want. Right? So you have all the bijections between these points. So then you have actually, then if you do that, so notice that you have three different values, right? And so then you have 6 points. And so the key thing here is that this point, this polytope is not as symmetric as this one. This polytope is missing some points, in a way. That's not making it as symmetrical as this polytope. And that's the K-transitivity idea at the end of the day. And something interesting is that this problem that I showed you before, this is Steiner triple covering problem, is 2 transitive, right? It's a hard problem, it's 2 transitive, but it's not 3 transitive. Okay, so now let me talk a bit about the hierarchies, the LP hierarchies. Margarita, how many minutes?
I don't know, we're
okay.
Like 20, 30 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So now let's talk about this cutting planes, this methods that help us improve the LP bound, right? So the mindset, remember, we're not going to run branch and bound, so we're just at the root node and we want to improve the LP bound. Okay, so what's the gist behind this techniques? So and this is a very cute picture from this book on this kind of methods. And so let me illustrate that with this. So this is basically the convex flow of integer solutions, integer feasible solutions. And P here, this green area, is the LP relaxation. Clearly, this is contained in that area, right? Now, so usually what we do is that when we run branch and bound and we're at the root node, we solve the linear program over this region, the green region. And what these methods do is they take as an input the relaxation, they take P, they lift to a higher dimensional space the relaxation. And so that's T of P. And so now the thing is that this object over here, when you project it back onto the feasible region, so that's this is the operator, the projection operator in this space of original variables, then what you get is something that's at least as tight as P. So the idea is that to apply this itera P, right? So you take your relaxation, you take the output of that operation, and now you can take that, you lift it, right? You do things in this like higher dimensional space, and then you project back, and it happens magically that you get something that's tighter than what you started before. And actually, if you this is known for a while that if you did this procedure n times for all the operators that we'll see n times, then you eventually converge to the integer whole. But the thing is that these procedures are very expensive. So then it's going to take like exponential time if you want to apply this on every method, right? And so that's why, in principle, this is not practical as well, right? And its computation can be like 2 to the n. So But anyways, but you can run this like a fixed number of rounds, and if you run any of these methods in a fixed number of rounds, because you can do this iteratively, then it's polynomial, the amount of constraints that you get and the number of variables that you create. Okay, and so now in general we can define a lift and project operator as follows. So T of P is convex. The object that we get is always convex. And when we project onto the original space of variables, we get something that's as good as P. We also, what we require is that we don't chop off integer solutions. When we project back, we are preserving integrality, right? So basically this is saying that the projection contains the integer whole of the solution. And moreover, we want for this operator to be monotone so that we can apply this iteratively, and we always get something that's at least as good as what we started with. And these methods, they can be traced back to the 70s, like 1974. Maybe you've heard the name of this applied mathematician, Egon Balázs. He died a few years ago, and he started this with something that's called it's called the lift and project operator, and then there's a sequence of papers that basically they took these ideas and then they refined it in a bit, and then they have a different flavor. So there's like the Shirali-Adams hierarchy, and then Loewe-Schreiber in 1991 they devised the Loewe-Schreiber method. Then Balázs with two other collaborators, Sebastian Seria and Gerard Cornejols, they defined the lift and project operator in a different setting. So Balázs defined that in 74 with a different framework. And then this acquired the lift and project name in 1993. And then you continue with Lasserre, etc. So there's an exhaustive literature on this. And actually this is like a post set on the strength of these operators. So this is the weakest one. So this is basically telling you like the higher that you are in this post set, this partially ordered set, the stronger that you are. So whenever you apply this to your linear relaxation, then you get something that's at least as tight as whatever is down below you. So this is called the lift and project closure. Then something that's stronger than that is the operator by Loewe-Schreiber. Then you have Shirali and Adams. And on the other hand, you have Loewe-Schreiber with a constraint that's like that some matrix needs to be positive semi-definite. And then both of these methods are dominated by Lasserre. These two methods are not comparable. That's why they are not connected. So there are some instances where Shirali and Adams could attain a better bound than Loewe-Schreiber with the PSD constraint. And they, as I said, they can produce different relaxations. You can apply these operators k times, like iteratively in a way. In theory, you can compute them in polynomial time if k is constant. And some of them are very expensive to compute. Lasserre, for instance, like 2 rounds on a medium-sized problem can be very challenging. Like at the end, like Lasserre is actually not a linear programming-based hierarchy. It's actually a semi-definite program that you're solving. And this talk, actually, we don't, like our results are not related to Lasserre. We'll see that that's actually like an extension of our results. We're gonna try to see what happens with Lasserre, but we're gonna focus in this talk on these operators that are here. So now let me tell you about our main result, okay? So let's go back to this example that I introduced before. This the common solve of that of all the permutations of the vector 1, 1/2, and 0. Right? So we have this. Now you can see that this polytope is integer empty. There's no integer points here. Right? Everything is fractional. And we're gonna apply our main theorem. So basically, okay, so P, as I said before, is your linear programming relaxation. And assume that P is k plus 1 transitive. Okay? And also that P doesn't have integer points. So let's see whether those hypotheses apply here. So no integer points were good. And then we saw that this is actually 3 transitive. So this holds for k equals to 2. Right? With the hypothesis of that statement, of the theorem. So now then we have that the following statements are equivalent. So first, let's look at this. So here we're saying that if the above holds, then basically you're saying that all of these operators, when you apply them k times to p, you'll get that you're not able to chop off. You're not able to certify that you can kill the optimal p phase. Like p, remember that p is your optimal p phase, and we want to improve on that. We want to chop off that phase, right? And so by chopping, if you are able to chop it off, you improve on the LP bound of your integer program. And so this is saying, well, if you are very symmetric, if you're k+1 symmetric and no integer points, then the strongest operator in this sense, I say Sirali and Adams k times, is as weak, right? It's not able to certify that there's no integer points, that you can't chop it off. It's the same as applying the weakest operator, that's the Diffham project closure, right? Let's go back to this. So this guy is as strong as this guy. Sorry, this guy is as strong as this guy. In this case, given that you're not able to chop off the optimal p phase, then you can think of that as is as weak, right? This guy is as weak as this operator over there. And then on the other hand, you have this statement that basically characterizes when this holds, when this happens. So that means that p intersects all of the n minus k dimensional faces of the cube. So let me illustrate that with this example. So we said integer empty. Let's apply this theorem with k equals to 1. We know that we're 3 transitive, so in particular we're 2 transitive. So so that means that, let's see whether we can whether 1 holds. So this is saying that p intersects all of the n is 3 and k is 1. So then this means that we're intersecting all of the 2-dimensional faces of the cube in 3 dimensions. So that means that we are intersecting all of the facets of the cube. Like p intersects all of the facets. But you can see that here you're touching this, you're intersecting there, the back, this other back, the top, and the bottom. So then 1 holds. So given that 1 holds, then any of these operators, if you apply them 1 round, like k equals to 1, you're not gonna prove, you won't get a certificate, right? That tells you that there's no integer points there. You're not gonna improve on the LP bound by applying. So now let's see whether let's see what happens if you apply them like 2 rounds. So now, because we are 3 transitive, so let's go back to 1. If you apply them, if k is equal to 2, then you get that you're touching all of the 1-dimensional faces. And the 1-dimensional faces are basically all of the edges of the cube, right? In this case. So 1 is basically saying that we're touching all of the edges of the cube, and this part is clearly not touched by p. Also, this part of the cube is not touched, right? So that's a 1-dimensional face of the cube. There's an intersection of 2 facets of the cube in 3 dimensions. So that's not being touched. Like you only need 1. And so given that we're not touching it, then all of these operators basically are gonna, when you apply them 2 rounds, are gonna tell you that there's no integer points in that region. And something interesting is that this theorem is not saying that the output of these operators is the same, right? So this is just saying that whether they are empty or not. And actually, this cube picture shows you, it's illustrating this phenomenon. So this gray polytope is what you get when you apply the lift-up project closure 1 round. We said that it's not empty, so we get something. It's actually that thing. But the purple polytope is when you apply Sherali and Adams 1 round and Loba-Schreiber 1 round. Notice that they are stronger than this, right? They are stronger than that. So at least you get the great thing, but actually you get something smaller. So you chopped off these fractional parts. They are also not empty because of what the theorem is saying, but then you get different objects. And so basically this theorem is telling you. And by the way, and before I go, so this is by applying only 1 round. Now, if you apply 2 rounds, notice that any of this, now this is going to be your input, right? So now this is going to be your new P, and you start from this. And so now you could apply the theorem to this thing over here. And clearly this is not touching all of the like 2-dimensional faces of the cube. That's like another way of like understanding this result. Like if you apply this iteratively. And of course, here I'm assuming, I'm putting like under the rug that this objects over here, if this guy is 3-transitive, this other polytopes are also 3-transitive. And in the paper we show that holds. So you can also think of the theorem in like apply it in that way. And so now we have this collapse of the operators, right? So now all of them are at the same level. They have the same strength. Either all of them are weak or all of them are strong. Now let's apply our theorem to another object. This is called the cropped cube. And the formulation is kind of a bit nasty, or whatever. You have that sum over all of those subsets of n, etc. But there's in 3 dimensions, there's like a nice way of describing this object. So you start from the cube, 3 dimensions, right? This is the general formulation, but then let's fix n to 3, and you chop off of the cube all of the vertices, of its vertices. You chop off all of the 0-dimensional faces of the cube, which are the vertices. Here we have, notice that we have 3 active constraints there, so we chopped up. That's 3-dimensional, 0-dimensional. You chop off that. And what do you get? That cute picture. So you chopped off the vertices, right? Given that you chopped off all the vertices, then that object doesn't have integer points inside of it. So you are integer empty, and trust me, you can show that this is n-transitive. So this is a highly transitive instance, highly symmetric instance. And in 2001, Michel Goemans and Stephen Consell, they showed that by applying n-1 times the Lola-Schreiber operator, then that's not enough to certify that that object doesn't have integer points. Right? So we know that applying n times, we'll get that this is integer empty. But so this is basically telling us that this object is very hard, like these cutting planes are not strong enough to show that there's no integer points there. Right? So here we're going beyond like this optimality phase. Just think of P as something that you want to know whether there's integer points inside of it or not. You want to certify. You want to have a certificate that tells you that there's no integer points inside of it. And also, like later in 2003, Monique Laurent, she showed that this stronger operator, the Shirali and Adams, like n-1 rounds applied to this object, we're not able to show that's integer empty. But now with our theorem, we can get that almost for free. Why so? Remember the first condition. Right, the first condition. So we want to show that we want to apply our theorem with k equals to n-1, right? So if you apply that to k with k equals n-1, this is saying that whether P is intersecting all of the 0-dimensional faces, yes, all of the 0-dimensional. But that is not the case, because notice that you're not touching all of the vertices of the cube, right? Sorry. Yes, I said 0-dimensional. Yes. So sorry. We're applying this. Sorry, we're applying this with k equals n-1. Yes. So for that we would need n. So we want to apply this with k equals n-1. And so if we replace this by n-1, we'll get that the dimension of f is going to be dimension 1. So we want to know whether we're touching all of the 1-dimensional faces of the cube. The 1-dimensional faces of the cube are all the edges of the cube. And notice that is basically we're touching all of these edges. And by looking at the picture, and you can think of this as the only thing that you chopped off from the cube are the 0-dimensional faces. And actually, all of these intersections are the parts where you're touching the one-dimensional faces of the cube. So given that this is true, and sorry about the confusion later, this tells you that applying any of these operators n-1 times are not gonna be able to show that this is integer.
Yes. For the result of Monique Laurent, you don't need step 1 as the proxy, right? You can immediately jump from 3 or 4 to 2, because all these statements are equivalent.
The thing is that Monique Laurent exhibits a point inside of.
No, but on the previous slide you said the prior people, I forgot who they were.
Yeah.
They show that it's LS.
Yeah.
And then you said you use the 1. But you can prove the claim by Laurent directly from that one. Right?
Oh, so this follows. So if this is true, this is implied.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. But so
the other way around is your theorem.
Sorry?
The other way around is your theorem, because these statements are equivalent in the.
Yeah, exactly. The interesting part of the result is the other way around, right? Yes. Yeah. But you get that direction for free because of the strength of the operators. Yes. So then that's like another application of our results. And actually with our techniques, and this is something that very cute that Jose noticed, that you can apply also the technique per se, not the result, the main theorem. You can apply the techniques that we developed in the paper, for instance, to show that the rate of convergence, like how many also rounds do you need to show whether an equality is valid or not. There's a typo there. This should be hierarchy. You can on the rate of convergence using the techniques that we have in the paper for this knapsack polytopes that are basically that were like extensively studied by Dan Beastock and Mark Zuckerberg in 2006. And then, how many minutes do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. And then we have another result. So here we have the following setting. So before, notice that we only had ls without the plus. In this statement, we have ls plus, which is not linear programming based. It's a semi-definite program, actually. So this is very cool because we know that these two operators are not comparable in general. But we have another assumption on P. So here we're saying that P cannot be full dimensional. And the reason is basically because like the techniques are different. Like first we showed this result. We did it with applying a specific set of techniques, and then it was not clear how to extend that. And then the full dimensional case, or the theorem that basically doesn't have any assumptions of the dimension of P, uses some different tools. But at least for something that's not full dimensional, we know that that all of these four operators are basically at the same level. So this is linear programming based. So at the end, like you're solving the relaxation, the object that you get is a linear program. This is something called like a spectrahedron. So it's something that involves like imposing some matrix is PSD, and then this is also linear programming based. And so then let me tell you about the key takeaways. So yeah, I hope that at least you take this like home. Is first that we have an attempt of like a unified view of the strength of these hierarchies under symmetry. We're trying to basically develop this other perspective on just not focusing only in the branching, but also in the bounding part. And also that the more symmetric the optimal P phase, that at the end is like if of course if some condition holds, the condition 1, then it's going to be hard to cut off that phase. So if you're using a solver, and then if you can choose the set of cuts that you're using, and then you know that your instance is very symmetrical, and then you have an idea that maybe the first condition of the theorem holds, then maybe stay away from these cuts. Because these cuts are also very expensive for solvers. So there's even like very cheap cuts that you can generate using things that you can get from the simplex, for instance, the Montgomery-based cuts, etc. And something else interesting is that there's this hierarchy collapse for this linear programming operators under symmetry. So overall, future work, something that we're very interested in with Jose, Victor, and Yuri is extending this to partial symmetry. So we started from the fact that we say, like everything here assumes that you have something as k-transitive. In particular, you're one-transitive. So that means that all the variables, all of the variables are connected in a way. So your instance is already symmetrical, very symmetrical. But what if you can basically decompose your problem in you have a problem such that there's a set of variables that are very related, and there's another set of variables that are also very related, but they are not related in between themselves. And that's like an interesting, I would say, extension, because that's what there's most of the problems actually have those kind of symmetries. And we are also interested in extending this to Lasser and actually to other integer programming closures, for instance, Schwarz-Montgomery, split cuts, etc. So, yeah, thank you for your attention. There's a link to our preprint. It's an archive. There's my webpage in case you want to check out the other things that I do. And yeah, thank you for your attention.
I don't know if anybody else has some questions. Yeah, okay. So I think because we're on time, yeah. If anybody wants to ask questions, Matías,
yeah, I'll stay around.
You can ask me. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Tenemos un regalito para...
¿En serio? No.
Un regalito, damos un detallito. Muchas gracias. Sí.